Okay, well, good morning and welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter this morning, Rosina Schroer Santiago.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, my name is a mouthful, and so don't try to say that too fast. But I am a licensed professional counselor, addiction counselor, and I am the founder of the Therapist of Color Collaborative. And I really like talking about what we do to promote psychological safety in really many of our spaces. I see there's a lot of community-based, I saw as mental health, government, in every space that we exist in. If you notice, when we think about psychological safety, and maybe just a little caveat, it's okay if you're interactive in my presentation. So if you have raised hands that we can see, or you pop a question in the chat, the more interactive for me, the better. I don't have a very rigid presentation that I can't stop and ask a question. So I definitely want this to be interactive, because I think as we interact, you get more from it because you're engaging and touching the material that's important for you. So I'll definitely kind of put that out there. But psychological safety, what many of us don't think about when we think about psychological safety is really knowing who we really are. When we look across the spectrum and we look cross-culturally, I'm just going to put these questions up here for us to think about as we kind of set the stage. How do you define your own cultural identity? How are these identities that you identify yourself? Like, I identify as Afro-Latina. And so how has this become a part of who I am? And how has your identities become a part of who you are? What are your values, right? What are your North Stars? The way that you kind of orient yourself to the world. What are really important for you in maybe all of your environments, or maybe your professional environment, to your personal environment, to your social environment. It might be something like trust. It might be your faith. It might be spirituality. It might be family, right? But all of these things are all a part of us, from who we're looking at right here on this screen to what's important to us. And even recognizing that over the spectrum of our lives, all of this has changed, right? And so how have your values changed as you've gotten older? And I like to poke this question out there just for people to sit, to really think, especially I think many of us exist sometimes in spaces where we have to filter ourselves out, and we try to do everything that we need to do to fit in. And so I like to ask, if everything about you was the norm, what would make you different and unique? And I'm wondering if I could get some engagement on that question. If everything about you was the norm, what would make you different and unique? Nope. Let me go back.
Not seeing anything coming in the chat yet.
Okay, y'all are shy. Don't be shy today. And so I'll leave that question there, and I want you to hold on to that question as we advance. Your curiosity, I see Leah put up in the chat. Yeah, your curiosity, silliness. Yes, I love all that. And when you think about just those things that make you unique, how do you think that impacts the way that you're communicating with others in all of your different spheres? And if you had to be the same all the time and not be able to demonstrate that unique quality, do you think it would be difficult for you to interact in the world? And I think in many regards that it would, right? Oh, this is really interesting what this is doing. Bear with me. All right. let's see. All right, there we go. It's making me swipe, which I've never had to on Zoom. I put this statistic up there because this is just one of, because it's my profession, but I think this exists in many multiple spheres. But as a therapist of color, right, because I'm also a mental health professional, statistically, when we look across the spectrum, there's only about 19.2% of all psychiatrists that identify as a BIPOC clinician, 5.1% of psychologists, 17% of social workers, and so on and so forth. And roughly my profession as a licensed professional counselor, we're about 15% to 17%, depending on which link you click on from the Department of Labor. So that means out of these percentages that you're seeing, the broader majority doesn't identify as a person of color. So when we look across the spectrum, and we've been talking a lot about cross-cultural diversity, inclusion, and lots of different spheres. But when we look at these numbers, when you think a small percentage of that identifies as BIPOC, we have to allow ourselves to leverage that there is a norm and a mainstream that is happening across society and across the different environments that we're acting in. However, there's still small percentages that don't identify as being a part of that majority that still need voice and still need space and still desire to participate, contribute, and do all the things that we need to do. And whether our lives, our work, our social, we all desire to fit in. So, when we look at these numbers, these are small numbers, but they're numbers that are also representing that everybody's not the same, right? And so it's super important to recognize that even in these spheres, we have interpersonal needs, and each and every one of us desires to have certainty, right? These 6 buckets over here, and I'll kind of use my mouse to point them out. We need to know what we're walking into, how we're interacting in relationships, and we need to know that how we're showing up is going to be okay. We also need variety, though. We need to know that everything is just not monotone, right? Not talking at the same voice, no facial expressions, everything just plain, right? Variety, right? It gives us the ability to know that there's flexibility, we can explore, we can be curious, and it promotes the dynamics of our relationships. We also need to know that we matter in significance, a genuine sense of being made to feel that we belong, that other people value us, that we're worthy. And these things, when we look over here, maybe my mental health person is familiar, the Maslow hierarchy of needs. But many of you, if you in the service industry, we talk about Maslow hierarchy of needs. When we are made to feel that we are important, it definitely contributes to feeling safe, love and belonging, building our self-esteem. And all of these things allow us to get to that highest point of ourselves, which is self-actualization. Connection, being interpersonally connected. There are so many studies that show that when people are isolated or taken away from human to human connection, things deteriorate from our mind, our speech, our ability to understand nonverbal cues. When we look across the spectrum, are justice involved? Folks, when they're put in isolation, just the different things and impact it has. There are studies that even talk about from babies. Like, we know that even babies, the most delicate and infant in their human development, if they are not touched upon, their early stages, these babies will die, which is part of the reason why, from utero, they learn to make facial expressions and cues and, coos rather, their little noises that make them cute, that make us as the adult desire to pick them up and touch them, because it's a mechanism that they must have to survive. Growing. I think people at some point in their lives have existed in spaces where you couldn't feel like you could grow anymore. Whether you outgrew a team, whether you outgrew a position, whether you outgrew a sport. If we're not in places and spaces where we can grow, we will kind of truncate our own development, feel like we can't grow or do anything, and it starts bringing us in, and our circle draws in, and the world around us draws in when we feel like we can't grow. Even in your social relationships, some may have kept a small circle that has been strong and solid, and those relationships have continued to grow with you. And others have faded away, right? Because they weren't aligned with you, they weren't growing with you, they weren't sharing the same interests as you anymore. And that happens. And even in that, when we look at the last element, contribution, we all desire to be able to participate. Nobody just goes into a relationship and not desire to want to put something in that. Even just here, right now, me sharing with you, like I'm contributing something that I hope that you find meaningful, because interpersonally, this is something that I value and I want to share with you all today. So this is my contribution to share, right? And that's just a small example. And I'm sure we can all find different areas within these buckets that are super important. And when we can look across just how we're showing up in the different spaces, I'm sure we can see maybe even areas that maybe some of these buckets aren't being filled in, and we're recognizing we might not have full satisfaction. And so why is all this important, right? And why is this even important to psychological safety? Well, for me, when I think about psychological safety, we need psychological safety to know that we are safe enough, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally, behaviorally, to show up in the environments that we're showing up in, to know that we can be included in the environment, to have a safety to learn without disruption, right? And grow professionally, personally, however that is, how you're learning. Being safe to contribute without being ridiculed, being made fun of, being judged, being shamed, right? And being safe to challenge the status quo and know that because you're challenging, or maybe you're going up against a little bit of the grain, that you're not going to be retaliated against, or you're not going to have repercussions as a result of you speaking up, right, for yourself. How many of you have existed in environments where you didn't feel safe to contribute? And maybe this could be a thumbs up in the chat. It could be a hand raise with that. You don't have to say anything, but how many of you have existed in those environments? Maybe you didn't feel included in your environment. Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs up, yes. And when you felt that way, you know, it definitely, you know, that feeling of being left out, I want you to recognize that. And just know, like, when that happens and we're being outed, right? We're being pushed to being an outlier. And now we can no longer contribute. Now we can no longer be a part of something. We're not learning because we're more focused on the judgment. We're more focused on the guilt or even the shame of not being able to contribute. And so that's disabling psychological safety. When we think of why that's important and that pain that we feel, and I like to highlight this, you know, that part when we're being pushed out and we're being outed and we're being made to feel that we're an outlier, our brain and our body actually registers that as physical pain. And so when we think about like being isolated, those feelings of rejection, being left out of something, and not feeling like we can be included in something and that we're contributing and we're a part of something, our bodies really register that as physical pain. Like the brain doesn't know how to distinguish that just something happened versus actually having something physically wrong with us, right? We're registering it all the same. And quite honestly, if you pay attention to that, or if you can go back and recall that, you can actually recognize like, yeah, that hurt. You know, that lump in your throat, that emptiness in your stomach, right? Like that void. You might have even gotten nauseous. You might have felt some pains in your neck, back, right? Your lower back even. There are so many different things that you could feel when you're feeling that sense of being left out. So this is super important to be aware. And I'm pointing this out in this way because, you know, inclusion is more than just like, hey, I'm just going to make you feel a part of something. It's really creating an experience for somebody to truly and more wholly be a part of something, whether it's an event, a function, training. We have a responsibility to do that. When we think of safety to learn, can you think of a time when learning became difficult and it was really hard for you to be successful at accomplishing a task? Can you think of a time where you had severe, analysis, paralysis of just being on stage? You couldn't perform. You just looked out in the room and you were just stuck. And if you think of that moment, maybe it was a speech, maybe it was a presentation, maybe it was an award or something you were getting, and you felt that performance anxiety and you felt paralyzed and almost plagued by that paralysis. And if you look back, did you have somebody that came alongside you and supported you? Did somebody come up and nurture you? Or were you made to just sit in that really icky feeling of just being stuck? Have you ever been in a classroom and have somebody say, well, that's just stupid? And then just looking around and it's just like, well, gosh, I thought I was contributing, right? We need safety to be able to do that. When we create an environment, and I put this up here, that promotes learning and safety, you actually promote a culture of vulnerability, risk-taking, and resiliency. So when you encourage people to like make mistakes, you provide them support and they're not like penalized or they're not ridiculed or written up or removed from projects, we actually allow people to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge either when they need skill building, when they need additional supports and training, or even if they don't feel they actually have the capacity to do something, people can be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I think that might be a little bit too much. Can I have a partner on this project? But if we're ridiculing somebody and we're not giving them that safety to be vulnerable enough to open up and disclose that, we're actually promoting a culture of self-censoring, a culture of disengagement. And quite honestly, I think we see it a lot in our world today. We have this culture of this fear of failure. And this fear of failure is very, very impactful to a lot of individuals because so many people are afraid to make mistakes that they feel that they must be perfect all the time. And quite honestly, nobody here is perfect, right? It'd be nice if we were, but unfortunately we had two folks or however you subscribe that kind of messed that up for us from the very, very beginning. So nobody can be perfect, right? Even science isn't perfect. It's a practice, right? Same with medicine. It's a practice. We're working on getting things and we're working to make advances, but nothing is exact every single time. And contribution. I love this little visualization that I put in here for so many reasons. Because when we create a space where people can contribute, they go from this cautiousness where a teacher is spending time or a trainer or somebody spending time supporting them and they're equipping them with their tools that they need to be successful. and they might have some difficulties and they're still trying. But if you create that culture where they're not afraid to fail, or they're allowed to fail forward and continue to try things, then they start seeing that they can accomplish some things. And then it starts building their self-esteem. And then they're connecting with others, and they're even sharing with others, bringing others along and showing them, hey, I tried this, I had some success. This is what I learned. What might you want to learn? And being able to have this exchange, right? And it goes to like, maybe I can try this, right? And we're trying and we're doing things and we're building and we're finding moments and opportunities where we're having successes. And then we start feeling really good about it because now we're performing. And it's like, yeah, I can do this. This feels good. I know how to operate. I know how to do things. And it's no longer anybody showing them how to do it because now they have a confidence they can do it themselves, right? So it's learner-centered. And then even when they make mistakes, there's trial and errors that happen and they continue to work on things, they persevere, and now they're driving their own successes. And so when you reflect on that and you think about like moments where you didn't know something, somebody taught it to you, you tried it, you started succeeding, then you figured out how you could kind of make it your own, and then you mastered it, and now you have your own masterpiece. It's because you tried, and it went from you learning something to, making it your own and trying it your own way to driving your own outcomes. And this is super important, like when we think of contribution, because contribution isn't linear. It's not just you being the only one who puts something in, but it's others contributing to you too, right? And it gives you the power to believe really in possibility of what's possible. But when you think of times when you felt that you couldn't contribute, think of how disempowered you might have felt, how disabled you may have felt of not being able to participate or be a part of something because like your input or your contribution didn't matter. And so building this continuum to allow people to feel a part of it, we're building not just better people, but honestly, we're building a better society. We're building better programs. We're building better engagement forums. We're building a much better everything when we give people a space to believe that they're their own subject matter experts. And we are just facilitators sometimes in that process to help them get the tools for them to be successful. They don't need us to do it for them because quite honestly, when we do, we disable their ability. But when we give them the possibilities and arm them with a few more skills, we just facilitate a process that helps them get to where they desire to be. Any questions? I know I'm kind of moving through this, but I just want folks to think about some things. Safety to challenge when we think about being in environments. And I like this little diagram. And if you haven't ever heard about it, this guy named David Emerald wrote this book called The Power of TED. And TED is an acronym for the empowerment dynamic. And I really like this model because I think we've all seen the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer in some form or fashion. Sometimes we ourselves may have identified with the victim. Sometimes we may have been the one doing the rescuing because it was so uncomfortable for us to watch somebody in this suffering or having these problems that we were like, here, let me just help you. As a mother, I know I've done it with my children, right? Coaches sometimes do it. There are many rescuers throughout our lives. And these rescues sometimes can be our persecutors, right? Sometimes the rescuer who helped you could be the very person who's the reason why everything is wrong, right? And so this little dreaded drama triangle, we leverage a lot, I know, in therapy, but, I just want to give a little language today because I'm sure as service folks and front-facing folks, you're touching a lot of people where I'm sure you can see some of that. But when we don't approach it with empathy and we don't think of just like all the other layers that impact an individual from their culture to their morals and values, we're not looking at this more holistically. So it's paying attention to like, how are we empowering people to create possibility, right? And that's where this empowerment dynamic comes up, because we're empowering people to believe they don't have to be stuck here. And instead of asking the question like, well, why did you do that? It shifts to more of like, what might you need to be successful? If you could choose something, or if you had something, what might that be? Versus, why didn't you ask the question that, would have got you the resources you need? We don't know what's in their minds. We don't know the different things that they're managing. So when we employ some empowerment into our interpersonal communication and interactions, we go from the why, which introduces shame and judgment, to the what, to allow them to be curious. And sometimes we might be able to challenge them, right? And encourage and push them to their best way of being. And sometimes we might have to coach. And I like to think, I know in my profession, I do a lot of coaching per se, because I can't help and steer people into the lives that, that they're wanting to live, but don't know how to live. And I'm telling them how to get there. I can't do that, right? I kind of coach, and I give them some skill building to try out, see how they master it, see how they might feel about trying some new skills and gaining some new knowledge, in order for them to feel like they're actually creating the outcomes. And I'm just facilitating it, just making space for it. But when we think about that fear, right, that fear of being retaliated against, that creates a lot of shame. Like, I can recall, even just in my own experience, being in spaces where I knew if I said something, either I was going to get in trouble or someone else was. And I remember that really icky feeling like we should be able to say something without feeling like somebody's being penalized as a result of it. Nobody learns and nobody wins when we're always worried about being punished. And I think that really is in every single environment. And quite honestly, I wish more environments stood in spaces where they recognize, if we're only enforcing a hierarchical culture where everything is top down, everybody's always afraid of getting in trouble, how do we ever encourage anybody to take risks that promote innovation, possibilities, right? Change, shift, right? We can't make any of that if we're not encouraging it. And so this fear of failure, right? When we're not doing that, we're really putting people in this space, and they're not even choosing it. We've created the culture that pushes them there. And I don't know about you all, but I kind of like a culture of creators, because creators are innovators. They're visionaries. They're creatives, right? They're not even necessarily always artists. They just think out of the box. They're not protocol people. So think about that. I want to share this video because when we think about, cross culture, we got to think about like perspectives, awareness, avoiding stereotyping, how we listen. It's lots of different things. And I like this little video, which is going to have me stop sharing, and then I'm going to have to reshare my other little window. It's talking about like just our own perspectives on how language is showing up and our own stereotypes and perception about it. And I'm just going to fast forward it a little bit. And I'm only going to play just a little snippet because I want you to hear him.
It's really great to be in Bergen.
Can everybody hear that?
This week I'm in Bergen. I live in Oslo. I guess I'm living in the wrong place. Yeah. As you quite rightly say, my name, Pellegrino, which is my first name, means pilgrim. It was given to me by my Italian parents. It's as if they knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. You know, let's give him the name Pilgrim and then he'll travel the world. And that's basically what I do. This is my workplace. I do a lot of traveling. I could give you a fancy title of what I do, but what I really do is I try to help people communicate better, especially in a global business world. So I try to help people communicate better with other nationalities. Now, you know, the first thing you think of when you work with other nationalities in cross-cultural communication is, let's look at the other cultures. Well, I take a slightly different approach. I say to people, take a look at yourself. So I'm going to talk a lot about perception, because it's all about perception, understanding what people see. Now, as you say, I have Italian in me. I have a lot of British in me. Some people are often surprised by my English accent. Quite nice, isn't it? Yeah? Because you weren't expecting this. I know you weren't. You know, you're expecting me to speak with the Italian accent. Yeah? Don't speak like that. And I've been in Norway for over a third of my life, actually. So I've got a lot of Norwegian in me as well. And I love what I like doing with people. I have these little social experiments to test their perception of me. Now, as I say, I travel a lot. So I like playing with the airlines. I like going up to the airlines and talking English, or sometimes I talk with an Italian accent to see what kind of reactions I get. And English is the best one. If you want good service, you speak English like I do. It's fantastic. People take you seriously. Well, they do, you know. I mean, yesterday the plane to Bergen was late, you know, and if I go up and say, excuse me, it's 30 minutes late, I'm a punctual person, I don't like being late, you know, they just take you seriously. But yesterday I thought I'd try it in an Italian accent. So I went up and I actually said, you know, excuse me, but the plane is 30 minutes late. I'm a punctual person, you know. Exactly. I got the same reaction as you did there. And this is one of the problems of working with other nationalities. You know, people see what they want to see, and they don't always see what you see. And this is one of the challenges. Now, just before we get into it, culture, let's look at culture. Culture, my definition of culture, and I know this doesn't cover everything, but let's keep it simple. I usually do 2-day workshops on this. I've got 18 minutes. A system of behavior that helps us act in an accepted or familiar way. Keywords there, accepted or familiar. We're basically doing things which are accepted in our social group and which are familiar. So a lot of my work is actually explaining Norwegian behavior to other nationalities. So I'm constantly looking for this sort of, can we describe a Norwegian in a nutshell? And I think I found it. I found this fantastic text on the internet. I want you to read it with me. It's worth reading, yeah? If you were to use a color to describe this person, he would have to be green. He lives in isolation in his home, a place he best describes as his and cozy. However, he's not the most receptive of people when it comes to visitors. Okay, the typical Norwegian. He is somewhat primitive, but he is honest, straightforward, and all he really wants in life are the simple little pleasures like peace and quiet. Do you recognize any of this? There are some key words that kind of, can you see that? They jump out at you. And you think, okay, it's a stereotype, but a lot of this is a bit true. And I show this to Norwegians and they kind of nod, yeah, okay, I'll give you that one. And then I surprise them. This is a description, not of a Norwegian, but of a Hollywood film star. Yeah, would you like to know who it is? There it is. It's that person there. And the point about this is you often believe what people tell you as well, you know? I could sit there and tell you this is a Norwegian, yeah, and you believe it. It's not.
So I like that little example because they're going on and they end up describing Shrek, right? And so when we think about cross-cultural communication and how we're communicating things, people, it's just like he says, and it's so true. A lot of people, sometimes even without interaction with the actual person, will believe something about an individual just based upon what they've been told. If they've been given certain descriptors, if they've been given certain characteristics, well, then this must be so. And we know more broadly in the world that we live in, we know that stereotypes exist in almost every environment that we are, that we see ourselves in, and they penetrate, right? So these stereotypes aren't just things that we're casting upon people, but it's also putting people in boxes that they didn't necessarily put themselves in. These descriptions weren't informed by the actual participant, right? They didn't get a chance to create their own descriptions, somebody else did. And these things translate to how people show up and address and connect with them. And so I like using that particular one because it's very true. I mean, you would never thought that he was talking about Shrek, right? And so I'm going to continue on here. Let's share back my presentation. And so when we look at this, we have to step away sometimes from just like what we know and, always just focusing on accomplishing, like if we set up step 1, 2, 3, and 4, well, this is going to make us successful in every version of how we communicate cross-culturally, how we're communicating in our professional spaces, and how we're just allowing people to be safe. And quite honestly, it's none of that. We can have some guidelines and we can have some bylaws, but part of this is starting with stepping away from your own ideas and being more self-aware of how you're showing up in your own footprint. And sometimes I like to say it's finding comfort in discomfort in order to find comfort. And I know that sounds really crazy, but sometimes if we're not aware and we're just focusing on these steps or these guidelines and bylaws, we don't really show up as knowing or demonstrating that we can be flexible. Rather, we're showing up as like the subject matter expert, and I must know this because I can adhere to these things. And this isn't a set it and forget it. It's saying, I'm taking time to really be present and I'm allowing this person to be the subject matter of their lives. And I am but a humble participant and I'm learning and I'm open and I want to be curious. That was a word that came up earlier. I want to be curious and not like put them in a position where they're having to explain everything, but curious on my own terms, doing my own work and taking time to do my own research and not leveraging this person's knowledge or their experience that might make them feel like they're being a little exploited or maybe even a little tokenized, which I don't think any of us ever want to do. But sometimes when we step away from that idea of competence and acting like we know something because we've mastered steps 1 through 4, it also gives us a chance to move in spaces of just like social responsibility and social justice and how we're looking at changing the social inequalities and inequities that are really just across the spectrum right now. And I think each of you on this screen today are working with a lot of folks that are disenfranchised in many ways. They are economically, socially disadvantaged. And even just like resources, right? Something as simple as resources are disadvantaged because either they don't know how to access it, they may have so many that they don't know how to access. And quite honestly, when we think of that culture that's being created of the fear of failure, sometimes even our clients or the folks that we're working with and we're serving, sometimes they feel they can't come to us when they don't understand something because sometimes they're approached with, well, didn't I tell you, right? And that's not really creating a space where they can be psychologically safe. We're actually creating judgment and shame because we're not allowing them to express, right? Creating a space safe enough for them to express what their difficulties, because let's be honest, if everybody could check a box all the time, most of these programs wouldn't exist for a lot of people who need them. And so we need spaces where people can be encouraged to speak up when they're having difficulty. And we got to bridge some of those gaps. We leverage cultural humility, right? Cultural humility is super important. And it means that you're doing your own conscious self-reflection. You're critically self-examining your own way that you're showing up in your professional spaces. And I really think this shows up more specifically in our human service work, right? It's moving beyond acquisition and mastery of skill to really just being authentic, personal, and making connections with people, right? We can still be professional and make connections. It's relating to others, right? And it's connecting with others. And it's recognizing that there's this dynamicness of culture and how culture shows up. And it's challenging the barriers that are impacting communities and marginalized folks that don't have access to this. And those of us that have this luxury, being in the positions that we're in, we are leveraging that to be that voice and taking this up on our end to institutional levels, right? Because the folks that we're serving and supporting might not have the knowledge, skills, or abilities to get over here. So we're leveraging our role in our positions and what we have to support those that don't have the ability to, right? It's committing to these relationships, to the communities, to colleagues, right? That humility and our cultural humility is super important, and that we're not going to ever utilize or leverage it as we're engaging in our own self-reflection and even our own self-critiquing. And for me, cultural humility goes both ways, right? There are things that I don't know about my peers who aren't Afro-Latina like me that I leverage even in my own interaction. How am I showing up? How are my questions? What language? How am I creating space? And I like to say, this is kind of like, I might be dating myself, but if you ever remember hearing about an Easy Bake Oven, an Easy Bake Oven was this thing, you mix this little cake mix up and you put it in this little oven and you turn the dial, and then once it rang, it was done. So you like got to set this little dial, forget it was cooking, and then open it up. And then you had a cake. Well, cultural humility is not an Easy Bake Oven. As nice as it would be to just like set it and forget about it, you actively have to engage this every single day. And for me, cultural humility is also, I think it's a form of self-care, because you're engaging this regularly, you're being aware of who you are, how you're showing up, you're actively making space for others to show up and to have safety to show up. And you're creating a culture where folks feel vulnerable and open enough to share with you. And I think when people do that and that interaction we have, I think that also pours into our buckets. Because I don't know about you, I think when I see people have successes, I kind of feel vicariously, I have some successes too. And so leveraging cultural humility is not just about like, I'm going to be gentle and sensitive. It's about saying that I'm actively engaging something that feels good for me to involve and be connected to others in this thing that we call life. And then I'm going to actively engage it on a daily basis. It's a courage to interrupt bias, right? And I love this part because, you know, sometimes, right? And I put this intent versus impact. When we think about intent, we hear that a lot. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't intend for that to happen. But if we're aware of the impact of how our human footprint is upon the lives of others, we're more conscious, right? We're actively working to be aware that I know wasn't my intention. I know that the work that I'm doing and how it may possibly land, and engaging in courageous conversations, right? Like I'm listening to understand, I'm being genuinely empathic. Sometimes it's sitting in silence, right? You might not be able to give that advice you want to give, or you might not be able to put some information out there or give advice that was unsolicited. Sometimes it means you're just sitting there, and it's giving visibility to the truth of people, right? It's witnessing the difficulties sometimes. And it's navigating our own relationship with vulnerability. And I put these two Kwanzaa principles up here: Umoja, which means unity, and Ujima, which is the collective work and responsibility. Because for me, I think in this work, when we're working in our communities and we're doing this human service work, you know, we have to strive to maintain unity within our family, community, nation, and race. But we're also building to maintain this together, to make our community problems our problems, so we can actually do the work of making them better. And that's the courage to interrupt bias. If we're not standing in these spaces and doing these things, we're not interrupting it, and we're not creating spaces for those who don't have the ability to feel safe and get to their best selves. We're not making space for that to happen. And so those of us that do have the ability, and I'm not saying everybody has to go out on a crusade and champion this, but I think each of us has a social responsibility to be aware of how we're doing it. And as we can make space, absolutely. If you don't have capacity, recognize that, but hold space where you can. Show up where your strengths are. Because it takes courageous action. And I love this. We learn courageous action by going forward whenever fear urges us back. Doing our own work. We're always, there's always something you can look at in your life and recognize, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if I do this? Well, I'll challenge that question. What happens if you don't do it? What happens if you are the one that needs to take the action? What if you're the one who's the advocate for someone who can't advocate for themselves? What if you are the one holding space for someone who's never had that held for them before? What if you're allowing somebody to be a part of something that they never thought was possible? And so courageous action means that you are doing that work. And we're not allowing ourselves to be held back by any dynamic, anything that might push us in a way that's not promoting a forward action. You're allowing yourself to take that action anyways. Because if not you, then who? And if you've ever heard of like the 4 agreements, I think it's Paulo, I always say his last name wrong, but he talks about the 4 agreements. And I like to add, and I remember listening to his 4 agreements, and I'm like, I want to add this to courageous conversation. And I started looking it up, and I'm like, ooh, I'm not the only one. But it's staying engaged, experiencing life and being with discomfort, speaking your truth. There we go, Don Miguel Ruiz. Thank you so much. And accepting and accepting. So expecting and accepting non-disclosure. So I like to say it's not necessarily agreeing to disagree, but you're agreeing to not have to not have closure. Because sometimes we're not going to have closure. But if we stay in a space where we can't accept not having closure, we don't have or give ourselves permission to move forward. And so courageous conversation is just that. When we're making space for people, or even we're curating it for ourselves, it's staying engaged and recognizing that our truth is probably the most powerful thing that we have. And the truth of others, right? As we're moving in these spaces. And so I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I want to make sure, and I'm being mindful of time. I just want to share this little quote, and then I have one closing video and I'll open it up. I think this matters for a lot of ways and reasons, but when I think of this, I look at it from the lens of a therapist. And Sharon Salzberg, she's one of our, I guess, voices that speaks a lot to trauma and how we're healing ourselves and the work that we're doing. But this quote that she says, the kind of compulsive concern with I, me, and mine isn't the same as loving ourselves. Loving ourselves points us to the capacities of resilience, compassion, and understanding within that are simply a part of being alive. And so I'm going to turn it over to this video, and I'm going to open it up, and we'll have a little dialogue, hopefully. Share. All right. And good thing I teed all my little videos up. And so it starts with each and every one of you here today. And I hope that you take a little bit of this away with you and how you can promote psychological safety in the spaces that you're in. Not just for yourself, but for the folks that you're serving. And so thank you. I open it up to any questions, comments, concerns, as we look to wrap up.
Thank you so much, Rosina. Yeah, if anyone would like to share their thoughts, questions, comments, feel free to do so in the chat, or if you have any kind of reactions, just wanting to check in with all of you.
Oh, thank you, Erica.
Yeah, filled me up in many ways. I couldn't agree more. I'll just share from my perspective. I think this is a really great pause and a really great start to my day, Rosina, I have to say. Like, just being reminded to care for ourselves and also, you know, holding the space for care as advocates or helpers, and the people that we are working with, right? So I couldn't agree more, Erica. Filled me up in many, many ways.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, self-care is not, it's not just a niche word. It's not just a fly by the night word. Like it's intentional action, right? We do each and every day. And, you know, when we do that, like that act of self-care, it does create psychological safety. We do feel safe to contribute because our buckets have been poured into, right? And I think if we don't create awareness to it, like it's not just, you know, I think these words of inclusivity and diversity, we've been using them so much that we're not really getting the intention behind it. And the intention behind it is to really make space for yourself, for others, so that we can all exist in spaces, whatever spaces we're showing up in, and be safe enough to put in, right? To contribute, to learn, to grow, to do all of the things, because nobody wants to be where they are if they're struggling.
Yeah, thank you for sharing in the chat. Lots to think about. Absolutely. And I think you definitely posed a lot of questions that I think, as we get caught up in our everyday work, it's definitely a great reminder to be intentional about a lot of the things that you discussed and helped us kind of think about this morning. So absolutely, thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Again, feel free to share all of your thoughts with us here. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll be sending out a follow-up email with all of the information, with the presentation that Rosina shared with us today, as well as a survey, which I'll go ahead and put the link just for now in the chat. And again, like I said, I will share that in a follow-up email as well, but continue to share your thoughts in the chat.
Even if you have any questions that may have come up for you as you were listening to some of this today.
Yeah, Christine, self-care has to be intentional actions.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Christine.
This is Agueda. Good morning. Thank you so much, Rosina, for doing this amazing webinar. And I think what I really appreciated and really take away from this is that we service providers in the field. I speak for myself though. In my experience, I've seen that we tend to do these. We talk about big words. We talk about all these that we have it in our brain and it's there, but when we try to put it into actions, that get lost, right? So it's all about the thinking and in some way there's like these kind of effect that we tend to think that because we went and learned about it, then we know it and then we put it into practice. When in reality it's all in our head, and like the hardest part is to really come to a place where we can see who we are, what we value, and then be able to have the process through the communication and the way that we engage with others to really put it into practice, right? That's what is lost. That's what we don't get. And you have highlighted it. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
That is so true. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think sometimes, the more knowledge people, and that's why I say step away from competence, because just because you know it, it doesn't mean that you know how to apply it. And sometimes I think sometimes smart people are really stupid because we forget how to connect and genuinely be with people, because we've let the arrogance of knowledge, we've let the arrogance of education remove us from like where people really are. And we remove there are people who remove themselves through like this education and stuff, and they can no longer just genuinely connect empathically. So yeah, no, you said that so well. And that is something I definitely hold very dear to my heart. Like, I think it's like knowledge and education. I think it's a privilege and it's a luxury. And I think more specifically as service providers that I think are in this space, folks of color, who navigate spaces where they're getting education and they're moving up, we get to take this back. And this is our social responsibility to go back and kind of that each one teach one. We make that pathway and we bring others forward. It's not getting this knowledge and getting to this place and then just kind of looking and be like, oh, sex for you all down there, but actually bringing people forward too and being with people in that struggle to get there.
This is Agueda again. The other aspect to add is that as we gain the knowledge and we become privileged with that knowledge, we minimize and erase those who have not gone to college or any had not that privilege, but have the amazing fortune to know it because it has been passed from one generation to the other one, who that has been organically through the community being shared. That is valuable. That is priceless. And I speak for that because I know there's people in my country, in my community, that because of those issues and those reasons that we deny and erase, through the conquer, we got rid of that. We lost our language. The indigenous communities in my country lost their language, lost the ways of living because of that. And that's not acceptable at all.
No. The wisdom keepers, they hold so much. And I love, that you're bringing that up too, because there is so much power just communally too, which I think, cross-culturally, that's an aspect, I think, in many professionally, I think it's overlooked, right? Like they don't look at the power of community and culture and just like what that gives to, I think, a people, a society. I think even a body of work can be so well informed when we really leverage, like you said, our organic resources. Our organic resources are abundant. And sometimes I think because of where the world tries to take us, sometimes these are organic resources that are untapped, and there's so much abundance and richness of just like knowledge and just experiences that are still yet to be shared, right? So no, awesome point, I get that.
Yeah, does anyone have anything else that they would like to share?
You're welcome, Angela. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Okay, well, again, like I mentioned, I will be sharing how you can get in contact with Rosina. If there's any other things you would like to share or feedback or thoughts, or just connecting, right? It doesn't always have to be something super intentional around our profession or what we do, right? It could just be to connect. So thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate all of you. Again, would appreciate if you filled out that survey, and I will be following up with you in a little bit. And we hope that you all have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much for being here. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.